The boarding call echoed faintly beneath a layer of soft, instrumental music, the kind designed to calm people who didn't fly often. Flight attendants greeted passengers with rote smiles, repeating seat assignments while reaching overhead for compartment latches. Bags thumped into place. Voices overlapped. A child cried 2 rows up. Someone coughed. The middle of the cabin buzzed with impatient chatter while the rear filled slowly, one carry-on at a time. Maya Trent moved down the aisle without drawing a second glance. Her clothes were simple washed denim jeans, a long-sleeve t-shirt, and an olive windbreaker cinched at the wrist. Her canvas bag was slung crossbody, scuffed at the seams but neatly packed. Her boots, regulation issue from a different lifetime, didn't squeak. She paused only once, when the passenger ahead of her stopped to argue about overhead space. The man tugged at a silver roller bag, clearly heavier than it looked, struggling to shove it above row 21. A flight attendant leaned over with a rehearsed smile and said it would fit fine. Maya noted the way the bag sagged toward one side as it finally lodged into place. She took her seat in 22 Alpha. Window side. The shade was halfway down. Her reflection floated faintly on the plastic pane as the cabin lights adjusted. She set her bag under the seat with practiced ease, looping one strap through the frame. A few rows back, someone laughed too loud at a joke that didn't land. Ahead of her, the anxious teen in 21 Bravo clutched his phone like it might fly away without him. The couple behind her debated whether to take off their shoes during the flight. They settled on yes. The plane filled. Overhead, bins clicked shut. One of the crew stepped through with final checks, moving fast. A voice over the intercom asked passengers to double-check their belts, trays, and devices. The tone was cheerful. Maya looked down and fastened her seatbelt without looking. A flight attendant leaned toward a seated man on the aisle, glancing across at Maya. The man lowered his voice, but not enough. He asked if she was a returning veteran. Maybe admin support. The attendant shrugged. Maya didn't acknowledge either of them. Her hands rested lightly on her thighs, fingers still. The man chuckled once and turned back to his crossword. Row 23 had a family with 2 kids, one of whom dropped a stuffed bear mid-rollout. The toy bumped Maya's foot. She picked it up without speaking and passed it forward. The mother mouthed, "Thank you," without making eye contact. Maya nodded. Movement at the far end of the cabin caught her eye. 2 passengers, middle-aged men in plain jackets, stood in opposite aisles. One lifted his bag. The other moved seats. No interaction with the crew. No eye contact. The switch took less than 5 seconds. A crew member turned to say something to the front galley but didn't notice. Maya's eyes tracked the seat swap. She didn't speak. She just watched. Another detail. The same man who loaded the suspiciously heavy roller bag was now seated near the emergency exit, but had no visible boarding stub. He kept adjusting his watch, even though he never checked the time. His jacket remained zipped to the neck, despite the cabin warming from packed bodies. He hadn't blinked in 30 seconds. The captain's voice came on, warm and practiced, welcoming them aboard. Weather smooth. Arrival on time. Estimated cruising altitude just under 36,000 feet. A few passengers clapped, earning a chuckle from the back rows. Maya didn't move. The seatbelt sign blinked overhead. Maya tested hers once, then left it slightly loose. The plane began its slow reverse from the gate. The engines hummed louder. Another announcement about tray tables came and went. The teen in front of her tightened his grip on the phone. The couple behind her shared gum. When the aircraft turned toward the main taxiway, Maya's eyes shifted again. The last crew member to check the cockpit had been delayed. She hadn't returned from the forward galley on schedule. That delay was 12 seconds too long. The jump seat light blinked out, then back on. Maya tilted her head slightly, listening beneath the hum. One of the cabin crew fumbled with a handle. then smiled too quickly. Nobody else noticed. She did. Her carry-on shifted subtly as the nose lifted. The scuffed fabric brushed her shin. The looped strap held. Her boot pressed lightly against the floor. She inhaled once, slow and shallow. Above, the oxygen masks waited behind a thin latch. Below, the carpeted aisle showed signs of uneven vacuuming. 2 rows up, one man coughed twice, touched his wrist, then settled. The plane lifted smoothly into the darkening sky. Outside the window, the city lights blurred as altitude increased. Maya kept her eyes forward. She'd seen it before, these silences, these disjointed rhythms. She'd heard it before too, in operations where one decision fell out of sequence and the whole pattern broke loose seconds later. No one asked who she was. No one wondered what she saw. She looked like any other tired woman flying home from nowhere special. But she was already counting, already listening, already noting which voices belonged and which ones didn't. She rested one hand gently on the buckle of her seatbelt, then let it go. The noise of the cabin settled into a false calm. Nothing had happened yet, but the shape of it was already in motion. The morning had begun like every other. Dry heat pressing in from all sides, radios chirping with clipped call signs, and the scent of dust baked into the seams of every uniform. Maya Trent moved through the fractured compound with her rifle slung high, boots finding quiet purchase across shattered tile and blown-out rebar. Overhead, the sky shimmered with heat distortion, and the ground vibrated faintly from artillery still echoing 3 blocks away. The airfield perimeter had been breached. Command had ordered a sweep and secure. No pause. No questions. Just clear the zone. Inside what remained of the west structure, she found movement behind a metal panel wedged against a wall. Her team was clearing forward, already past her position. She could have left it, could have called it in and kept moving, but she didn't. She pulled the panel aside and raised her weapon, and there he was. A boy no older than 12, crouched in the hollow of a former storage alcove. No weapon, no vest, just thin limbs shaking and eyes too wide for a fighter. He wasn't supposed to be there. The building had already been flagged. No heat signatures, no presence. She heard the voice in her ear. Confirm and move. No stragglers. Command repeated the order. If she left the boy, the next sweep team would not hesitate. But if she reported him, the process would follow protocol. Detain. Interrogate. No guarantee he would survive. Her finger rested against the trigger guard. She knelt, met the boy's eyes, and lowered her rifle. That was the moment. She keyed her mic and gave a false clear. Her tone didn't change. Her cadence matched. She stood, turned back toward the corridor, and led the boy out through a shadowed breach in the outer wall. No one saw them. No report was filed. 2 days later, her command pulled her from rotation. There was no reprimand, no hearing. Just a quiet meeting in a cooled admin tent where the ceiling fan ticked in tired rhythm and a folder sat across the desk with her name misspelled on the tab. Her CO never looked her in the eye. The paper inside wasn't disciplinary. It was a reassignment proposal. Stateside. Non-operational. A place to wait out a career's end without questions. Her clearance would remain intact. Her record unflagged. But she was done. They didn't say it out loud, but she heard it anyway. She'd broken trust not with her teammates, but with the institution that needed obedience more than judgment. The folder remained on the desk, unsigned. She walked out without taking it. Now, 14 years later, she lived on the edge of Dayton, in a 1-bedroom rental that backed against a line of freight tracks and utility lines. Her mornings began before the alarms did. She moved with habitual precision, each task methodical. Her flight boots, still polished weekly, sat beside the bed. Her duffel lived under the bench by the door. The only decoration in the room was a single photo clipped to the mirror frame, her, dust-covered, crouched beside the same boy, now smiling in the midday sun, a bottle of water in his hands. It had been taken by a translator with no reason to keep it, then mailed to her years later with no return address. She worked logistics now. Civilian side, pallets and manifests, sometimes fuel load checks, sometimes hangar maintenance rosters. She didn't mind the quiet. It meant fewer mistakes. No one asked why she still trained alone in the trailer gym behind the maintenance lot. The gloves she wore were regulation, though no patch remained on the knuckles. A paper map of global forward operating zones hung inside her locker, laminated and marked with redacted lines, each one traced with a fine pen. Some of them no longer existed. Others hadn't yet made the news. She kept to herself. No one questioned her hours. When she wasn't working, she ran rope drills behind the service building, where wind cut sharp through the chain-link fence and the gravel ground bit into her palms. She tracked her reps with silent discipline. Climbs, carries, holds. Not for show, not for memory, just so she would never forget. Every few weeks, she pulled out the folded resignation letter still tucked in the back of her drawer. It had yellowed slightly at the crease. She'd never signed it. There was no need. The silence had already made her absence official. That morning, with the sun barely cresting the low line of warehouse roofs, Maya stood in the doorway of her apartment and looked out across the flat, empty stretch beyond the lot. A freight train groaned in the distance, pulling long shadows across the tracks. Her bag rested by her feet. The airport shuttle would arrive in 15 minutes. She would board a flight like anyone else. Just a passenger now. No uniform, no rank. Just a name no one asked about. She didn't regret what she did, not once. The price was quiet, but it was honest. She reached for the photo on the mirror and slid it into the top pocket of her bag. Some things were never meant to be part of the record. She closed the door behind her and stepped into the early light, boots steady, eyes forward, not forgotten, just outside the frame. The cabin lights dimmed gradually, a soft shift meant to ease passengers into the cruise phase of the flight. Outside, only the faintest line of horizon glowed through layers of dusk-colored cloud. The seatbelt sign above Maya's row had remained lit, though the turbulence had stopped more than 20 minutes ago. No announcement followed, no chime, just the quiet pulse of that amber symbol overhead, forgotten by most, but not by her. Maya Trent adjusted her posture slightly, her spine still aligned, her left heel braced against the seat rail beneath her. The man across the aisle had finally dozed off, his arm draped into the walkway. A drink cart rattled faintly somewhere forward, but it hadn't passed her row. That struck her first. She looked up and to the left. One overhead bin sat unlatched, not open, just slightly ajar. No tag flapping. It hadn't been that way during boarding. She remembered the passenger who placed a navy duffel in that exact bin, pausing to adjust its handle. He hadn't left his seat since. A man stood near the lavatory, hands in his pockets, shifting his weight in careful increments. He wasn't waiting for the restroom. Maya had watched him approach, watched him hesitate when the forward crew member passed without acknowledging him. He had flinched, not in fear, but in calculation. Her mind noted the lag between his movement and the glance from the man in row 11 Charlie, who looked up a beat too late, as if reacting to a silent cue. Another step. The man near the lav opened his jacket and scratched his ribs with a movement too practiced. No one else noticed the object now clipped to the inside strap. It was not a weapon by military standard, but it could be made into one. Maya had seen worse used faster. A woman across the aisle gave a nervous laugh when her overhead light flickered. She tapped it with her palm and turned to her companion. They were arguing about movies again, too absorbed to notice that the air had changed. It wasn't the pressure. It was the rhythm. The steps were too soft. The silence from the flight attendants was now too long. One had not returned since her last walk forward, and her absence had stretched past reasonable margin. Then came the sound that did not belong, a hard plastic snap followed by a controlled grunt. Not pain. Restraint. Maya's breath slowed. Her fingers eased toward the canvas strap that looped beneath her seat. A man in business. Casual early 30s, compact build rose from row 13 and opened a bulkhead cabinet. He moved like he belonged there, like he knew what he was reaching for. But he wasn't crew. The jacket was wrong. The nameplate was missing. What he retrieved was not a medical kit or oxygen mask, but something smaller, coiled and metallic. From 2 rows back, it looked like a charger cable. It was not. Maya's boot shifted a centimeter forward. Her seatbelt buckle clicked open and remained tucked loosely beneath her forearm. She hadn't stood yet, hadn't signaled. No part of her moved in alarm. Just calibration. A sudden thud came from the front. A cry followed a short, broken syllable from someone trying to speak through panic. That was when the passengers noticed. People turned in slow confusion, their faces reshaping from mild discomfort into widening recognition. One man, broad-shouldered and breathless, surged toward the aisle as if ready to play hero. He didn't make it far. A fourth man, whom Maya hadn't clocked until now, rose from the jump seat nearest the service galley. He swept a baton low and fast, clipping the man's shin. The passenger fell forward, trying to shout, but his voice was drowned out by gasps and the sudden cascade of movement behind him. A child cried out as his tablet fell to the floor. A woman screamed. A tray hit the aisle with a sharp crack. That was when the plane truly changed. The man nearest Maya turned in panic, looking toward the noise. He glanced at her once, then twice, as if seeing her for the first time. His mouth opened slightly. He whispered, "They've got knives," and looked past her, assuming she hadn't understood or would freeze. Maya didn't answer. Her eyes were already on the one flaw in the hijackers' pattern. Their communication was line of sight only. No earpieces, no radio tap-ins. That meant they were relying on visual signals. That meant blind spots. She watched their spacing, their angles, how they moved to control crowd flow instead of closing down the space. They hadn't secured the rear. They assumed the cockpit was enough. They assumed passengers wouldn't organize. They had not accounted for someone like her. Maya pressed her heel into the floor and tested the flex of her shoulder. The noise in the cabin had shifted again. Panic blended with submission. Most passengers cowered, held hands over heads, obeyed, shouted orders. No demands had been made yet. That would come later. Right now, they were establishing presence. She touched the buckle again. Just once. The child's toy still lay beneath the seat ahead of her. A phone vibrated somewhere, but wasn't answered. She counted 4 visible hostiles. One more was likely seated, waiting. The man who'd tried to help was now pinned by a flex tie. No blood yet. No deaths. But the temperature of the flight had changed permanently. The overhead mask hatch hadn't opened, but her eyes flicked to it anyway. The next move wasn't theirs. It would be hers. But not yet. The lights flickered once as the plane hit a pocket of rough air, and the cabin jolted just enough to tilt a tray off a side seat. The metal clatter masked the soft scrape of Maya's foot shifting beneath her. She had already unlaced one boot behind the seat rail. Her belt buckle was loose, but positioned across her lap to make it appear still fastened. Her canvas bag remained under the seat, secured by its strap, but her right hand now gripped the thermos from the seat back pocket. It was stainless steel, dented near the base, still half full. She waited for the right sound, a raised voice 2 rows ahead, one hijacker shouting at a man in a suit to stay down. The momentary focus on a new target pulled attention forward. Maya twisted, letting her arm slide down the aisle edge and bump the child's toy with the back of her hand. A soft squeak. Then silence. The hijacker closest to her, the one positioned between rows 21 and 23, glanced sideways, annoyed at the noise. He moved half a step back to regain control of his position. That broke the angle between him and his nearest line of sight. Maya rose low and fast, coming up beneath his center of gravity. She drove the thermos into the soft hinge of his jaw just as his weight shifted. His eyes rolled slightly, knees buckled. Before his body fully dropped, She hooked her elbow under his chin, turned his own momentum against him, and guided him backward into the emergency hatch frame. The impact was quiet, controlled. She caught his collapse between the seat and the wall and lowered him without a sound. The woman across the aisle gasped but caught herself. Her hand covered her mouth. Her eyes locked on Maya not in fear, but in dawning comprehension. Maya didn't pause. She slipped the hijacker's improvised restraint tool from his waistband, then used it to bind his wrists. It wasn't tight, just firm enough to keep him from moving until it was too late for him to matter. She stuffed the tool under the cushion behind him, reached for a discarded food tray, and snapped off its edge, sharp enough to splinter, flat enough to pass for debris. She used the turbulence. As the cabin shuddered again, she slipped back into the aisle, crouching low beside a service panel. From there, she could see the next threat. The hijacker in the galley had shifted position. His back now faced the beverage cart. His hand was on the intercom handset, but he hadn't engaged it. Maya read the tremble in his stance. He was steady, but not fluid, trained, not seasoned. The flashlight lay in the jump seat pocket. She slid it free with 2 fingers and clicked it once, quickly, at the floor, mimicking an electrical short. He turned to look. She moved fast. One hand drove the flat of the tray edge into his elbow, disrupting the arm's extension. The other swept the thermos up, this time into the base of his neck where the collar met skin. He stumbled sideways, slamming into the bulkhead. Maya pivoted, catching the back of his jacket and pulling him into her shoulder. She turned just enough to drive him down against the galley floor, catching the weight on her knee to muffle the fall. He didn't get up. A child cried from mid-cabin. A phone clattered to the floor. Somewhere near the front, a voice shouted a warning, but it was late. Maya dropped to a crouch and scanned for movement. The first hijacker was still unconscious behind row 23. The second now lay behind the galley wall. She had isolated 2 out of 5. She didn't know where the 5th was yet, but he had not reacted. The woman across the aisle was still watching. Maya made brief eye contact, then lifted one finger to her lips. The woman nodded once. Quickly, Maya turned toward the front. A man was kneeling beside an injured passenger, trying to apply pressure to a wound. Not serious, just a laceration from being shoved. Blood pooled faintly on the floor mat. Maya noted the pattern of the smear, the angle of movement. Someone had rushed him, then pulled back. It hadn't been random. It was tactical pacing. The hijackers weren't killing to control. They were staging dominance, a show of force. That made them predictable. She moved through the shadows cast by overhead bins, her steps light, careful. Every shift of her weight was calculated. Her breathing had changed, but only slightly steady under pressure, managed in pace. A sudden call from the cockpit froze her. A voice she didn't recognize shouted something in Arabic, followed by a bang on the reinforced door. The plane jolted again. The hijackers had not yet entered the cockpit, but they were close. Maya didn't flinch. She slid the flashlight into the side of her waistband and stepped past the service panel. Her foot ached from earlier impact, one toe likely fractured. She ignored it. She glanced once more at the unconscious man in the galley. His wrist twitched faintly. He was alive. No one else had moved. No one else had seen the gap she exploited. Maya was no longer reacting. She was moving, quiet, precise, unseen. The front of the plane waited, but not for long. The cockpit door hung open, one hinge warped from the hijacker's attempt to breach it. Maya stepped over a shattered headset and reached for the edge of the bulkhead. The captain was slumped to the right, his harness digging into his collarbone, blood matting the side of his temple, still breathing, but out cold. The co-pilot was conscious but dazed, one eye swollen shut, his movements slow and disoriented. He tried to speak, but the sound caught in his throat and turned into a hoarse exhale. His hand lifted, reached for the throttle, then dropped. She moved quickly but without panic, sliding into the left seat, her legs tucked into position with a familiarity that hadn't dulled despite the years. The cockpit was lit in sharp, sterile whites and blinking warnings, altitude holding, heading drifting. One engine was drawing uneven power. Fuel levels were stable, but the left side trim control was flagged in amber. Maya reached for the comm panel, fingers brushing over the frequency dials before settling on the emergency channel. Her thumb hovered, then pressed down. Her voice was quiet, even. She didn't clear her throat or ask permission. "This is Tango November. I am assuming control of Flight 064. Pilot and co-pilot are incapacitated. I repeat, crew is down. This aircraft is under emergency command." The response took several seconds. A voice crackled back, tense and unfamiliar. Unverified caller. "Say again. Identify yourself with airframe code and position. You are on protected approach vectors. Respond immediately." Maya adjusted the yoke slightly, correcting for a gentle pitch drift. Her palm rolled the trim wheel one notch, just enough to settle the left wing tension. Outside the windshield, clouds thickened. She could see the glint of another aircraft, far off, matching speed, not commercial, military escort. She keyed the mic again. "This is civilian passenger Maya Trent, former United States Army, 47th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. I am qualified on rotary and fixed-wing systems up to Class Charlie. I am in control of this aircraft. We have multiple injured. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. I am vectoring toward a short strip emergency field at grid reference 209er. Confirmed military compatible. I will land this plane." Silence stretched long. Then came a second voice lower, calm, professional. "Tango November. This is Air Defense North Command. We have you on radar. You are outside normal protocol. Say intentions clearly." She looked at the co-pilot, who was trying to sit upright again, blinking hard. His hand found the edge of the console. She reached over, rested her fingers briefly on his wrist. "Hang on," she said. Then she turned back to the controls. Her eyes scanned the HUD. Altimeter steady at 29,000 feet. Heading correction in progress. She input the minor strip's grid manually. It wasn't in the commercial database, but she had trained on that airframe once, long before it became classified. She knew its elevation, the wind pattern off the western slope, the old antenna array that had once been its beacon. The engine coughed once. She toggled auxiliary power, shifted draw, and watched the reading level out, still too high, still too fast, but manageable. Outside, the escort plane moved closer. Through the side window, she caught the sharp profile of an F-16 holding position off the right wing. A voice entered the cabin, tinny and crisp. "This is Viper 3. You are ordered to maintain current altitude. Identify yourself." She didn't answer. Her hand moved to the throttle. "Viper 3. This is Air Defense North. Hold position. Do not engage. Pilot of Flight 064. Confirm you are able to descend." Maya's response was steady. "I am beginning controlled descent now." She touched the flap control, adjusted for slope. The plane began to drop gently, the hum of the engine's shifting tone. The cabin would feel it. People would brace. The seatbelt sign, still illuminated, offered no comfort. The co-pilot whispered something unintelligible. She glanced down and saw his lips moving. Then his hand lifted toward the ID badge still clipped to his chest. She read the name. His eyes met hers for a breath, and he nodded. The aircraft dipped through the edge of cloud cover. Below, the valley opened. Trees, a strip of asphalt, the old radio tower. No lights, no beacon, but she could see it. The wind pressed hard from the left, tugging at the nose. She countered. Her left hand held the yoke steady while her right worked the flaps again, timing the descent in her head. She could feel the air change around her, the resistance, the temperature, the altitude thinning into grip. A voice returned over the radio. "Tango November. You are cleared to land. Emergency personnel standing by. Strip is unsecured but clear. Confirm approach." She didn't confirm. She just flew. The escort pulled wide. As the plane sank lower, her own reflection floated in the windshield faint, fragmented by warning lights. She looked like a ghost seated at the controls. No helmet, no wings, just hands that remembered. The strip rose fast. Her voice never shook. Her hands never left their place. She would not let them die today, not while she was still flying. The wheels struck uneven pavement with a sound that reverberated through the frame like a low thunderclap. The brakes fought her. Systems staggered, but the aircraft held its line. The left engine stuttered in protest, coughed once, then stabilized just enough to carry them across the old strip's faded threshold markings. Dust sprayed in waves beyond the cockpit glass, catching the light like a curtain. One last vibration ran through the fuselage, then faded. Maya Trent kept her hands on the yoke for a few more seconds, just until the inertia bled off and the aircraft came to a full stop. A soft mechanical sigh followed as auxiliary power kicked in, but only partially. Cabin lights flickered to half brightness. A child in row 19 began crying. Someone else sobbed. Someone else laughed loud and choked with adrenaline. She didn't react. She reached forward and flipped the final master switch to standby. The cockpit fell quiet, punctuated only by the wind tapping faintly against the nose cone. The co-pilot stirred again. He turned his head, looked at her, and nodded once. She returned the gesture. That was enough. Outside, emergency vehicles rolled into position. Flashing lights blurred across the side windows, but no sirens sounded. The ground crew had been told to expect the worst. What they found instead was an aircraft, battered but intact, resting in morning light. The escort jets peeled away, banking back into airspace with wings level and orders already complete. Inside the cabin, voices were rising. Seatbelts snapped open. Phones emerged from pockets. The front doors remained locked until fire crews confirmed safety. Maya stayed in her seat, her hands now resting on her knees, breathing steady. Her gloves were looped through her belt. The co-pilot's ID tag sat on the dash, blood crusted at the corner but still legible. Someone opened the main cabin door. A staircase clanged into place. The first responders moved fast but slowed as they entered. They had expected panic. Instead, they found order tense, quiet, held together by the same force that had guided them down. Passengers began to leave. Some looked back. A few glanced toward the cockpit. One child paused and pointed, but the mother tugged her gently forward. The crowd thinned, footsteps echoing down the metal stairframe. Maya remained seated, her eyes fixed on the instrument panel even after it had gone dark. A uniformed officer stepped into the cockpit. His boots creaked slightly on the rubber flooring. He looked at her, hesitated, then said with quiet clarity, "We flew with your father. Haiti, 1999. He flew low and dirty, just like that." Maya didn't reply. She gave him a single nod, stood, and stepped aside. The officer didn't salute. He didn't need to. She moved down the aisle with no urgency. Her canvas bag was waiting beneath her seat, still looped through the rail. She retrieved it, checked the strap, then walked toward the door. Her boots made no sound against the threshold as she stepped into sunlight. The air outside was cool, touched with jet fuel and early haze. The sky had brightened to a pale gold. News crews were already assembling near the perimeter fencing, their cameras aimed and steady. Someone shouted questions, but they didn't reach her. A woman in heels held a clipboard and tried to wave her down. Maya didn't stop. At the base of the stairs, a medic offered her water. She shook her head. Another person asked for her name. She gave none. A murmur passed through the crowd. A man in civilian clothes turned to someone beside him and said quietly, "Who was she?" No one answered. She passed through the security line without breaking stride. Inside the small terminal, people were already replaying video clips on their phones. Grainy footage showed her silhouette at the controls. The voice on the black box had been isolated and confirmed. Transcripts were circulating. The name Maya Trent was appearing across agency logs, cross-checked against long-closed service files. The press had questions. Defense Command had more. She answered none of them. By the time the last passenger had claimed their bag, Maya was gone. No fanfare, no statement, no uniform to display. She walked out of view, braid pulled tight, canvas strap across one shoulder, boots steady on the concrete. Days later, an official report confirmed the hijacking had failed. The plane had landed under emergency command. All souls aboard accounted for. The pilot of record was listed as unknown, but cleared. Investigations were pending. Recognition was discussed. She did not attend the briefing. At a veterans memorial outside a county airfield in Ohio, a folded nameplate appeared beneath the brass plaque of a fallen airman. It bore no message, only a strip of faded flight tape marked with the letters TN. Nobody claimed credit, no ceremony followed. But someone passed the memorial days later and stopped to look. They stood quietly, hat in hand, before moving on. Some names don't need to be spoken aloud. Some landings speak for themselves.